Good day, everyone. It is my honor to serve as keynote speaker in the second International Conference in Education Leadership and Management. I am truly grateful to IABCGH for the opportunity to share. The title of my presentation is Contributing to Transformation, Resilient Educational Leadership and Innovation, Anchor on Change Management Strategies. The COVID-19 pandemic led to transformation of our educational system from what we used to know as the regular way of learning, face-to-face classroom setting, to what we consider as the new normal way of learning. We are now confronted with different learning modalities. Our educational system have evolved to adjust with the zeitgeist or the needs of time. There are key arguments that I would like to bring forth as I proceed with my presentation. The phasing of my presentation is in line with the argument that I am bringing to the table. The key arguments are as follows. The pandemic is a trigger that leads to change strategies. It challenges educational leaders' ability to serve as change agents and innovators. Their responses entails meticulous planning and action anchored on change principles and strategies. Interestingly, the kind of responses of educational leaders demonstrated resilience and innovation of the educational system. If this COVID-19 pandemic paves the way for opportunity to improve our educational system, the question is, how do we make sure the sustainability of the opportunity even beyond crisis? The challenge remains, how do we sustain resiliency and continuously innovate? I leave this question for now and hopefully we'll make sense of it as we proceed with the presentation. To properly start with, let us define resiliency. What is resilience? Resilience can help us get through and overcome hardship, but resilience is not something we're born with. It's built over time as we experiences we have interact with our unique individual's genetic makeup. That is why we all respond to stress and adversity like that from COVID-19 pandemic differently. Resilience happens through time and entails elements of learning. Resilience as learning has three aspects, and these are coping capacities. This refers to learning how to cope with and overcome all kinds of adversities. Second one is adaptive capacity, learning from the past experiences and adjust to future challenges in everyday lives. Transformative capacities, learning how to craft sets of institutions that foster individual welfare and sustainable social robustness towards future crises. The concept is widely and generally defined with reference to several fields and foci. This ranges from the psychological trait of being flexible and adaptable, having capacity to deal with stress, and the ability to bounce back to a known normal condition following periods of stress, to maintain well-being under stress, and to be adaptable when faced with change or challenges. Needless to say that we are confronted with challenges in the midst of the pandemic. To a certain extent, we were able to bounce back and hopefully will go out of the pandemic with renewed mind and spirit, a better person, better educator, better leader, and innovators. Some of the lessons learned by our educational system amidst pandemic include greater possibilities for learning and enhanced flexibility, valuing job skills and preparing learners for adulthood, creating more equity and access so all students reach their unbounded potentials. The coronavirus pandemic has changed how millions around the globe are educated. New solutions for education could bring much needed innovation. And given the digital divide, new shift in education approaches could widen equality gap. Given the lesson learned, we can say that there are ways by which COVID-19 shapes our education. First, education nudge and push to change could lead to surprising innovations. COVID-19 has become a catalyst for educational institutions worldwide to search for innovative solutions in a relatively short period of time. Students got access to learning materials through live television's broadcast. In some schools or in some parts of the world, standard asynchronous learning online tools such as reading materials via Google Classroom were augmented with synchronous face-to-face video instruction to help preempt school closure. Students began leveraging online learning even for subjects such as physical education. Students shot and sent over their own videos of athletic training and sports to their teachers as homework, pushing students to learn new digital skills. With the advancement of technology, learners and solution providers truly embrace the learning anywhere, anytime concept of digital education in a range of formats. Traditional in-person classroom learning is complemented with new learning modalities, from live broadcasts to educational influencers to virtual reality experience. Learning could become a habit that is integrated into daily routines, a true lifestyle. At the onset of pandemic, we see how public-private educational partnership could grow in importance. In the past few weeks, we have seen learning consortium and coalition taking shape with diverse stakeholders, including government, publishers, education professionals, technology providers, and telecom network operators coming together to utilize digital platforms as temporary solution to the crisis. Cooperations are awakening to the strategic imperative, or rather corporations are awakening the strategic imperative of education populace. Third, the digital divide could widen. Most schools in affected areas are finding stopgap solutions to continue teaching, but the quality of learning is heavily dependent on the level and quality of digital access. After all, only around 60% of the globe's population is online. There are virtual classes on personal tablets in developed countries, and many students in less developed economies rarely, or rather rely on lessons and assignments sent via WhatsApp or email module being sent to learners at home. Moreover, the less affluent and digitally savvy individual families are, the further their students are left behind. When classes transition to online, these children lose out because of the cost of digital devices and data plans. Unless access costs decrease and quality of access increase in all countries, the gap in education quality and thus socioeconomic equality will be further exacerbated. The digital divide could become more extreme if educational access is dictated by access to the latest technologies. All this observation can be found around the globe. Let us have a glimpse of the context of the ASEAN. One of the arguments I posted earlier, the pandemic challenges educational leaders' ability to serve as change agents and innovators. In this is seen in the region. There has been continuing effort to advance SDG 2030. Efforts are focused on building concrete transformative education program and action plans. There has been continuing effort to examine sustainable development platforms for education in order to reach out to learners in different areas in the region. Exploration of the use of technologies for remote learning. Different learning modalities are continuously being explored, reinforcing learning assessment and anticipating educational opportunities from innovation. No one is prepared for COVID-19. Hence, immediate actions for education was done in order to mitigate the disruption of learning. Pre-COVID learning gaps were amplified. In the COVID era, learning gaps has been a concern since there is learning disruption, digital divide, teachers are not prepared to manage online learning. Concern ranges from technical skills to mental health. While inequalities are amplified, educational technology could also be a solution to manage learning and equity. At the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, the MOEs in the ASEAN region meticulously planned for change. They have implemented change management strategies to respond to the most needed change. As part of the argument that I posted earlier, their responses entail meticulous planning and action anchored on change principles and strategies. I believe that the different strategies of the MOEs in the Southeast Asian did not happen in a vacuum. These are a product of meticulous planning in order to address change. Hence, I would like to share with you the educational change management process framework in the ASEAN. SEAMEO and INNOTECH documented the process carried out by selected Southeast Asian ministers of education. And they have traced, or there are traces of common path using change management models and principles in the studies and in the study entitled Regional Research on Asian Integration, Change Management Responses of Selected Southeast Asian Ministries of Education. A process framework was developed to reflect the common strategies of the MOE in dealing with change. COVID-19 is a trigger that leads to change, hence it is worth sharing how MOEs respond to the needed change in the midst of challenges. So in the slides, I'm showing you the process framework, an educational change management process framework in the ASEAN. Let me walk you through the change management process commonly done in Southeast Asia or in the ASEAN region. First, trigger for change. In this stage, stakeholders can identify triggers or drivers that kickstart the impetus of change. This may be specific responses to the needs, opportunities, and issues relevant to COVID-19 pandemic. Change is a mixture of external and internal forces. In the process of managing change, it is important to take stock of resources, personal and institutional, that will help in responding to the triggers of change. Second, reconnaissance. It refers to preliminary survey, ascertaining strategic features. So this refers to choosing appropriate change agent and engaging the internal and external stakeholders. In the change process, it has been proven that reviewing current context and identifying an ideal future state serve as an effective strategies. In other words, it is important to ascertain our current state so that we could arrive at the desired future state. For any change to take place, it is important to ascertain on how far has a certain Ministry of Education implemented its previous plan, determine what they need to continue doing, what policies and program remain relevant and responsive for the stakeholders. It was highlighted that the changes implemented are responses to pressing external demands for change, while also taking into consideration the national context. There is a challenge outside, but it is important to look within one's country's context to provide the most relevant, responsive, and appropriate change. Second, the third one is a plan to change. Focus on the what and how of change. The unified strategies are essential. In this stage, setting realistic expectations and goals when proposing changes is necessary. It gives premium to evidence-based planning. Holistic approach to change management was demonstrated by examining, planning, and implementing changes from basic to higher education. It also put premium to coalition of experts. So how important are the ideas and perspective generated through gathering of expert, constant monitoring and evaluation, and ensuring strong and committed leadership. Gradual change may be implemented based on the most pressing needs in the national context, which may also coincide with the changes needed in the region. The top-down and bottom-up strategies are welcome, hence pertinent changes are planned and implemented in a collaborative way. The fourth one is implement change stage. Clear communication of what and how of change is a good strategy in order to successfully transition to the fourth stage, which is the actual change implementation. This includes diplomatic ways of collaboration to clarify the goals for change. It is important to communicate change to the different education stakeholders. It was even mentioned that it is necessary to maximize all forms of communication to reach out to stakeholders. They also generate feedback from their stakeholders to better improve their policies and programs. The ministries of education implement feedback mechanisms even at the school level so that the voices of stakeholders can be heard. MOEs highlighted the importance of top-down, bottom-up strategies so that changes can be shared, and at the same time, the voices of the villages can be heard. The fifth step or stage is monitoring and evaluation, improving plans and implementation by adjusting changes based on context. And it put premiums to the centralized mechanism for the implementation and monitoring of programs and strategies, the key performance indicators or KPIs, and exerting strong leadership and commitment in consolidating gains and producing more change. Varied forms of assessment, monitoring, and evaluation process are put into place. Also, they consider developing follow-through measure to monitor and evaluate the implemented change. So with that, it's very important to look into the characteristic or how do we characterize the change management strategies in the ASEAN. So these are change management as informed by evidence. As each MOEs reflect to their own context, they ascertain or they look into the policies and programs that can be implemented further and what change can be needed by looking exactly on what's going on in the national context. It's also change management as a thoughtful and coherent act. So they look into the context of other countries as well, and the development in the international context. They set manageable goals, they consult experts in various fora, and they embrace diversity. The next one is change management as empowerment. They guide their stakeholders in the process, and they also foster the ministries of education or the educational leaders foster capacity to trust and collaboration as they engage their stakeholders in the process of change management. They also identify, or rather change, another characteristic of the change management in the ASEAN is it nurtures sustainability. So they identify, the educational leaders identify risk before ruling it out. They continue the monitoring and evaluation, and they have the layering of strategies so that they can make sure that any change can be sustainable. At this juncture, what we can infer from the change management process employed by the Southeast Asian educational leaders, or the Ministries of Education, MOEs, what characteristic of resilient educational leaders can be derived? My analysis of the inferred characteristics of resilient education leaders go hand in hand with perspective on coaching and leadership development and other perspective on resilience in the face of adversity. First, our educational leaders remain or stay hopeful and focused on their vision. Resilient educational leaders believe wholeheartedly in their vision and what their educational system can become. They understand the type of culture that needs to be instilled and the behavior that they will need to model to give life to their vision. Their vision for a better future for every child in their educational system fuels all their decisions and action. They are keenly aware of the potential growth that their vision holds. They maintain sense of purpose and organizational values. An educational leader must consistently work on a clear and articulated sets of organizational values. Resilient leaders consistently apply specific strategies to ensure these values are clearly expressed and understood by others. They maintain perspective for a long haul. To strengthen resilience among educational leaders is to be guided by question. For example, where do I want this organization to go in 3 years' time? What are the strategies, behavior, and attitudes necessary to help us achieve our goals? Another way to help educational leaders to maintain perspective of the long haul is to find ways to celebrate the small wins along the way. Educational leaders spend so much time focusing on helping others that led them to overlook the need to evaluate the work they have done in the short term to drive the organization forward in the long term. A pat in the back is a boost that can keep the educational leaders going. Recognition of small wins is a fuel that can keep them going. Second, they have a growth mindset. Resilient educational leaders are wise enough to know that building greater educational system takes time. They are self-aware enough to know that the education system improvement journey requires persistence and ability to be at ease with ambiguity. It was mentioned in one of the stages that the change agent and committed leadership are important in planning for change. They are able to recognize that both themselves and their educational system are in the process of growth, and don't allow themselves to be discouraged when results aren't immediate. With this mindset, instead of taking setback personally, resilient educational leaders treat themselves and others with patience and understanding. When things don't go as planned, these educational leaders look for learning and lessons that can be taken away from what has occurred. In a crisis, a resilient educational leader doesn't dwell on the problem or looks to attribute blame, but instead remains positive, open, and searches for the solution. In the earlier mentioned change management process, monitoring and evaluation is the way to learn if the intended change has been achieved. Third, tolerating ambiguity. Flexibility is a key. A common resilience draining tendency among school system leaders is to feel compelled to adhere to every single strategy printed in the infamous strategic plan already approved. Rigidity in focus needs the strong company of flexibility in strategy. Recover quickly from a setback. As educational leader, you will setback is part of the journey. The harsh reality is that things won't always develop as you would like. A significant difference between resilient and non-resilient leaders is how they choose to handle the defeat. A major key to resilience is how quickly you pull yourself out of the mire and find flexible strategy for moving ahead despite setback. Be willing to see diverse perspective. As evident in the change management process, reconnaissance and planning for change stages put premium to diverse perspective, which reflect flexibility in implementing change strategies. Fourth is proactive behavior. In the face of adversity, sometimes you must let go of the old way of doing things. Rigid and blind adherence to the old way of doing things can prove detrimental to your resilient account. Clearly, taking the offensive is more resilient building than remaining defensive. Act rather than react. Adversity can bring out competitive spirit in all of us. Educational leaders rise to the top of the organization partially because they have track record for prevailing under adverse conditions. Invent new approaches to go ahead. Sometimes everything educational leaders learn about leading change gets thrown out of the window when unexpected adversity hits. An educational leader is faced with being a victim or an architect. He or she can choose to argue for the so-called old strategic plan, or he or she can find new approaches to capitalize with. So those are the characteristics of educational leaders drawn from the change strategies implemented by the educational leaders in Southeast Asia. Let us go back to the first question I posted at the start of my presentation. The challenge remains, how do we sustain resiliency and continuously innovate? So building resilient education system beyond the pandemic should be the goal. The publication of the Asian Development Bank claims posit consideration for educational decision at the national, local, and school levels. The publication claims that framing for change should focus on the 3 R's: response, recover, and rejuvenation. First, response, which we have observed already from the actions of the different educational system in Southeast Asia. Response, how can education and training systems sustain teaching and learning during closure of education institution due to COVID-19 outbreak? The other one is recovery. We frame our action to the notion of recovery and guided by the question, how can education and training institution prepare for the recovery phase when they reopen, make up for lost time for students, and enable their transition to higher levels of education or their entry into job market. The third one is rejuvenation. How can education and training institution undertake initiatives in response to the crisis to rejuvenate teaching and learning with the new tools and techniques, particularly expanding online education to complement face-to-face learning in pedagogically effective ways, and deploying new technologies to improving quality learning. With the above discussion on change, strategies, resiliency, capability to innovate, the 4 areas must always be taken into consideration by the educational leaders. And these are Area 1, access, consideration for ensuring access to education for all children and youth. Access is understood broadly and encompasses all aspects of enrollment, dropout prevention, and support measure for children to return to and participate in education. Area 2, learning, consideration for ensuring that all children and youth are learning. Learning is understood broadly and encompasses all aspects of teaching and learning, assessment, support to socio-emotional learning. The third area is consideration for ensuring the well-being of student, parents, and school staff. Well-being is understood broadly and encompassing all aspects of mental health and psychosocial support. The fourth one is consideration for safe school. Safe schools refers to measure enabling safe school operation in line with national guidance. The considerations are also relevant for non-formal education setting. With that, I believe that resilience must be built into our educational system. Thank you for listening and have a great day ahead.